The boardroom sat on the 42nd floor of Fortress Dynamics glass walls offering an unobstructed view of Boston's financial district. Morning light cut through the space at angles that made the polished mahogany table gleam. Victoria Ashford occupied the chair at the head, hands folded over a leather portfolio posture, radiating the kind of authority that came from 3 years of running a company and 6 years before that climbing through ranks most people considered impenetrable for women. 12 board members sat around the table summoned with less than 12 hours' notice. The email had been brief mandatory attendance matter of institutional significance. Clear your schedules. Several had canceled flights. One had left a wedding rehearsal dinner. Victoria never called emergency sessions without cause, and they knew it. The room held the particular silence of people waiting for bad news. Graham Rutherford entered at 9:58 Navy suit tailored to minimize the expansion that came with middle age and desk work. He'd been with Fortress for 15 years, VP of IT security. For the last 8, knew every system and for every power structure. The board members were familiar faces, people he'd presented quarterly reports to, people he'd played golf with, people who trusted him. He took his seat 3 chairs from Victoria and waited confident in the way men who'd survived multiple restructurings tended to be confident. The door opened again. Ezra Calloway stepped through wearing a charcoal suit that fit perfectly across shoulders that suggested he'd once worked out regularly and still carried the frame. White shirt, crisp navy tie, leather messenger bag over one shoulder. He moved with quiet confidence to the empty chair directly across from Graham, setting the bag down with deliberate care. Graham's brain took 3 seconds to process what he was seeing. The janitor, the night maintenance worker he'd fired 3 months back for security violations. Standing here in the executive boardroom wearing a suit that probably cost more than 2 weeks of his former salary. "What is the janitor doing here?" The words came out louder than Graham intended, shock overriding the filter that usually governed his professional interactions. Several board members turned. A woman in her 60s raised an eyebrow. Victoria's expression didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't shift, remained absolutely neutral in a way that suddenly seemed more dangerous than anger would have been. "Mr. Rutherford, meet Ezra Calloway, MIT Computer Science Summa Cum Laude class of 2012. Former senior cybersecurity architect at TechBridge Systems, where he designed encryption protocols for healthcare platforms handling sensitive patient data across 14 states. Graham felt the temperature in the room drop by what felt like 10 degrees. His confidence began developing hairline cracks. Ezra withdrew a document from his bag, a dossier professionally bound with a black cover and Fortress Dynamics logo embossed in silver. The thickness suggested comprehensive documentation. 147 pages, though Graham couldn't know that yet. Ezra placed it in the center of the table with the kind of care you'd use setting down evidence at a trial. "You framed me to cover your incompetence, and I can prove it." The words were spoken quietly without heat, which somehow made them more devastating. Graham's world tilted. The board members shifted in their seats, attention laser-focused now. This wasn't going to be a routine quarterly review. This was going to be an execution. Victoria raised one hand, a small gesture that commanded immediate silence. "We'll hear from Mr. Calloway shortly. But first, let's establish the facts as they were presented to this company 3 months ago." The wall-mounted screen flickered to life. A timestamp appeared, December 15th, 12:17 a.m. The image showed the server room on the 15th floor, the diagnostic panel flashing red warnings, error codes cascading down the display in a pattern that any trained cybersecurity professional would recognize as a cascade failure in the authentication system. The image froze on Ezra's face, captured by security camera as he entered the room. His expression showed someone who understood exactly what was about to happen and had decided to walk into it anyway. Not resignation, determination. The screen went black. White text appeared against the darkness where the termination. The eviction notice was taped to the door in perfect right angles, the kind of careful placement that suggested the building manager took a certain grim satisfaction in his work. 14 days to vacate, 2 months unpaid rent plus late fees, $2,400 total. Ezra pulled it free and carried it inside the paper, crisp and official in his hands. The number might as well have been 24,000 for all the difference it made to the $68.50 in his bank account. The apartment was small studio the landlord optimistically called a junior 1-bedroom because of a decorative screen between the sleeping area and the rest of the space. The screen was supposed to create privacy, create zones, create the illusion that this was anything other than a single room where a grown man and his 7-year-old daughter lived, because it was all he could afford on $17 an hour. Zeph slept on the pull-out couch, 7 years old, gap-toothed from losing her front tooth 3 weeks earlier. Braids done through YouTube tutorials because professional braiding cost $40, and that was 2 days of groceries. When she smiled, which she did often, despite everything, her whole face transformed into something that reminded Ezra so strongly of Naomi that sometimes he had to look away. Ezra set the notice on the counter where it joined the electric bill, showing a past due balance, the phone bill he'd been paying $10 at a time to keep from disconnection, and the robotics camp permission slip that had been sitting there for 2 weeks, $550 due by January's end. Zeph had mentioned it 17 times in the past month, not nagging exactly, but the kind of hopeful persistence that broke his heart because she still believed her father could make things happen if she just believed hard enough. His phone showed his bank balance when he opened the banking app, $68.50 unchanged from this morning. Next paycheck in 11 days. $17 an hour, 40 hours a week, minus taxes and insurance. $932 gross. $743 after deductions, minus the rent he'd already missed. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked in 30 months, no matter how many times he ran the numbers, no matter how many times he tried to find a way to make it balance. He looked at Naomi's photograph near the door, the one he'd framed in cheap IKEA wood because he couldn't afford anything better. Their wedding 7 years and 4 months ago. Summer ceremony in a public garden, under $75 for the permit, her dress borrowed from her sister, his suit rented for $89. She'd looked radiant anyway, the way she always did, the way she'd looked until the very end. She died 4 years back. Drunk driver ran a red light T-bone at an intersection, and physics did what physics does when 2 tons of metal traveling at 45 miles an hour meets a sedan. The settlement from the other driver's insurance had paid for the funeral and 6 months of rent. After that, Ezra had been alone with a 3-year-old and a career that no longer existed. Behind him, Zeph stirred. Her eyes opened, adjusted to morning light filtering through blinds that didn't quite close all the way. When she saw her father standing by the counter, she smiled, that gap-toothed smile that reminded him why he kept going. "Morning, Dad. Morning, kiddo. Sleep okay?" "Yeah, I dreamed about robots again, the kind that can learn things." Ezra moved to the kitchen area 3 feet from the counter and opened the refrigerator. "Milk, eggs, some leftover rice, a few pieces of fruit. Can we have pancakes?" He checked the pantry. Bisquick mix enough for 4 pancakes maybe. Cheap syrup that was more corn syrup than maple. It would have to do. "Sure thing. Coming right up." While she ate, Zeph pulled out a drawing from her homework folder. A man at a desk surrounded by monitors, brown skin, short hair, wearing a tie. The detail was impressive for a 7-year-old. She'd drawn individual keys on the keyboard wires connecting the monitors, even a coffee cup beside the keyboard. "That's you, when you used to make the security stuff. Mrs. Patterson asked us to draw our parents at work." Ezra felt something crack in his chest. She'd drawn this from imagination, from the stories he'd told her about his old life. She'd never actually seen him in that life, never visited his office at TechBridge, never seen him wearing a tie and sitting at a desk solving complex security problems. Her entire memory of her father was a man who cleaned toilets and came home smelling like disinfectant. "That's really good, Zeph. You got the details right. Did I?" She looked up at him with those enormous eyes. "Can you tell me more about what you did?" "That was a long time ago, kiddo. But can you do it again, the security stuff?" He looked at the eviction notice, at the bills, at the permission slip he'd never be able to afford to sign. "Maybe someday." She seemed satisfied with that answer, the way children often were when adults gave them hope without promises. She finished her pancakes and gathered her things for school. Ezra helped her with her backpack, made sure she had her lunch peanut butter sandwich, apple juice box, and walked her to the bus stop. After she left, he returned to the apartment and looked at the drawing she'd left on the counter. He folded it carefully and set it beside the eviction notice, 2 pieces of paper that somehow summarized his entire existence, what he'd been and what he'd become. 5 years ago, TechBridge Systems had occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Austin, Texas. The kind of building with a reception desk made of Italian marble coffee bars on every floor and those ergonomic chairs that cost $800 each. Ezra had been senior cybersecurity architect designing encryption protocols for healthcare platforms that would eventually handle sensitive patient data from hospitals across the country. His cubicle had a window view. His performance reviews used words like exceptional and invaluable and irreplaceable. His manager had told him confidentially that he was 18 months from principal architect, the kind of promotion that came with 6 figures and stock options and actual influence over company direction. Then came the vulnerability. Ezra found it during a routine audit 3 weeks before the product launch, a flaw in legacy code that had been imported from an older system during a refactoring effort. The flaw created a 90-second window where patient records could be intercepted during transmission before encryption fully engaged. It was subtle, the kind of thing most auditors would miss. But Ezra had been trained to look for exactly this kind of timing. Vulnerability had written his master's thesis on race conditions and security protocols. He documented it meticulously, created a full report with code samples, timing diagrams, proof of concept exploits, showing exactly how an attacker could leverage the vulnerability. He sent it to his supervisor, Warren Caldwell, with red flag priority and a recommendation to delay launch until the fix could be implemented and tested. Warren's response came within an hour, terse and dismissive, no action required. We're 3 weeks from launch. This is hypothetical. The Security Review Board didn't flag it, and we've got regulatory approvals. Moving forward as scheduled. Ezra had escalated. Sent the report to Warren's supervisor with the CC to the security compliance team. The response came back equally terse. Warren will handle this per protocol. Do not escalate further without department head approval. So Ezra had documented everything, kept copies of all communications, and hoped he was wrong. 3 weeks later, TechBridge launched their platform to significant fanfare. Healthcare Weekly ran a feature article. The CEO did interviews on 3 financial news networks. The stock price jumped 12% in the first week. 2 weeks after launch, someone exploited the vulnerability. 30,000 patient records intercepted from 3 Ohio hospitals. Names, addresses, social security numbers, medical histories, prescription data. Everything. National news. Stock price dropped 22% overnight. FBI opened a criminal investigation. 3 hospitals filed lawsuits. The board demanded heads. Warren called Ezra into his office on a Tuesday morning and terminated him for cause. For introducing the vulnerability during refactoring. For failing to follow security protocols. For gross negligence that had cost the company hundreds of millions in market value and exposed it to criminal liability. The logs show you committed the vulnerable code. Your name is on the commit history. It doesn't lie, Ezra. But the logs had been altered. Ezra knew it the moment Warren showed him the printouts. Someone had changed timestamps, changed author fields, changed commit messages, made it look like Ezra had not only written the vulnerable code, but had done so after the security review, deliberately bypassing the approval process. The cryptographic hashes matched because whoever altered them knew how to recalculate the hashes properly. He'd hired a lawyer, spent 6 months and $8,000 gathering evidence. But TechBridge had an entire legal department and forensic experts who testified that the logs were authentic, that the cryptographic signatures proved the commits were genuine, that there was no evidence of tampering. His lawyer eventually told him the truth in a coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon. You can't win this. They have better experts, better lawyers, and a paper trail that looks clean. Take the settlement while it's on the table. $12,000 and an NDA that prohibited him from discussing the case or disparaging TechBridge in any way. He'd signed because Naomi was in the hospital by then, her cancer having returned aggressively, and he needed the money for medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. 6 months later, she was dead. 6 months after that, he was cleaning toilets in Boston for $17 an hour, his name effectively blacklisted in every tech company that bothered to do a background check. Fortress Dynamics didn't look different from TechBridge. Same glass and steel architecture, same aesthetic of wealth and progress. Same ping-pong tables in the break rooms that no one ever used because everyone was too busy trying to meet deadlines. The company did cybersecurity work for government contractors, Defense Department, Homeland Security agencies that didn't publicly acknowledge what they did. Ezra had worked night maintenance for 30 months. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift cleaning floors, 12 through 15. The work was simple, repetitive, and paid $17 an hour, which was enough to keep him and Zeph barely afloat as long as nothing unexpected happened. The work required no thought, which meant his mind could wander, which meant he spent 8 hours every night thinking about the career he'd lost and the life Naomi should have lived to see. No one asked questions. Night maintenance workers were invisible by design, present but unacknowledged, necessary but unimportant. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant no one looked at your resume too closely. Invisible meant no one connected Ezra Callaway, janitor, with Ezra Callaway, the cybersecurity architect, whose name appeared in Google searches alongside terms like security breach and negligence, and terminated for cause. But invisible also meant watching. He'd learned Fortress's security infrastructure without trying. His brain was still wired for cybersecurity, still noticed patterns, still analyzed systems automatically. He'd learned it by reading code on monitors that engineers left displayed during coffee breaks by listening to conversations in supposedly empty conference rooms, while he replaced trash liners by observing the traffic patterns on network monitoring displays. He knew the authentication module on the 14th floor had a token refresh timing issue that would cause cascade failure within 2 weeks. OAuth 2.0 tokens, expiring 300 milliseconds before the refresh trigger, engaged a classic race condition. The kind of thing that looked fine in testing, but would fail catastrophically under production load when network latency exceeded the margin. He'd seen the error logs on Tom Wheeler's monitor 3 weeks ago, seen the same errors Tom and Lisa Brennan kept reporting. He also knew Graham Rutherford had dismissed 3 separate bug reports about this exact issue, his handwritten notes clearly visible on the printed emails Ezra had seen in Graham's trash. No action required, false positive. Ezra had considered reporting it anonymously, considered sending an email from a burner account, considered leaving a note on someone's desk. But he'd learned his lesson at TechBridge. Speaking up got you noticed. Getting noticed got you questioned. Getting questioned got you blamed. Better to stay invisible, keep his head down, collect his paycheck, and hope the system didn't collapse during his shift. It was 11:43 p.m. on December 15th when Ezra heard the problem coming to life. He was cleaning the 14th floor AT corridor, the long hallway lined with cubicles where the security infrastructure team worked. Most desks were empty at this hour, but 2 junior engineers remained: Tom Wheeler and Lisa Brennan, both in their late 20s, both dedicated enough or worried enough to work past midnight, trying to fix problems their supervisor kept telling them didn't exist. This is the 4th time this week, Lisa said, her voice carrying the particular frustration of someone who'd been right all along, but couldn't make anyone listen. Auth module throwing errors again. Tom leaned over to look at her screen, his reflection visible in the monitor. Same thing, token expiration mismatch. Exactly, I submitted a ticket Monday. Rutherford marked it resolved without actually fixing anything. Just closed it with a note saying the errors were within acceptable parameters. Ezra pushed his cart past them, slowly heading toward the elevator bank at the end of the corridor. He shouldn't have been processing what he heard. Should have been focusing on his work, on being invisible. But his brain did it automatically, decades of training and instinct operating beneath conscious thought. Token refresh timing issue. OAuth 2.0 with hard-coded 300-second TTL and refresh trigger at 295 seconds. Should have a minimum 5-second buffer for network latency. The fix would take 20 minutes, adjust the trigger threshold to 285 seconds run, regression tests, push to production. 20 minutes of work 3 weeks ago would have prevented whatever was about to happen. He lifted a trash bag from the bin beside Lisa's desk, tied it off with practiced efficiency, replaced the liner. Behind him, Tom and Lisa continued their conversation, voices low but carrying in the empty corridor. Should we email him again? What's the point? He'll just tell us we're being paranoid, that we don't understand the system architecture. Ezra turned back toward his cart. He should have kept walking, should have maintained his invisibility. But something in him, the part that still remembered being a senior architect, that couldn't watch preventable failure approaching without trying, that heard Naomi's voice saying, "It's higher than the towers, as bigger than just us," made him speak. That's a time synchronization issue. Both engineers turned. Lisa's expression showed surprise that the janitor had spoken at all. Tom's expression showed surprise that the words were technical rather than apologetic. Sorry, what Ezra felt, his pulse quicken. This was a mistake. Every instinct screamed at him to apologize, to say he'd misheard, to retreat back into invisibility. But the words were already out. The token refresh timing. Your NTP synchronization is probably off by a few hundred milliseconds. The system thinks tokens are expiring before they actually are, so the refresh trigger never engages properly. It's a classic race condition. How would you know that I've seen this kind of thing before, system? Different system, same root cause. Where, before this job, long time ago, Lisa's curiosity was genuine. Now her engineer's mind latching onto someone who understood the problem she'd been trying to explain for weeks. What did you do before this? Ezra hesitated. Say too much and they'd wonder why someone with that background was cleaning toilets. Say too little and he'd look like he was inventing things, pretending to knowledge he didn't have. Software engineering, different company. Tom opened his mouth to ask another question, but heavy footsteps cut him off. Graham Rutherford rounded the corner from the main elevator bank and stopped taking in the scene. 48 years old, 6 feet tall, the kind of build that suggested golf and gym membership rather than manual labor. Gray at the temples in a way that looked distinguished rather than aging. Khakis and rolled sleeves, despite the hour the uniform of a senior manager projecting accessibility while maintaining unmistakable authority. His eyes moved from Tom to Lisa to Ezra, cataloging positions and relationships, processing the tableau before him. Problem? Tom straightened reflexively. No, sir, just debugging the auth module errors we've been seeing. Graham's gaze continued its assessment. When it landed on Ezra, something shifted in his expression. Not hostility exactly, something more subtle. The look you'd give furniture that had been moved slightly out of place that needed to be returned to its proper position. I said log the errors and move on. Higher priorities right now. Lisa found her voice younger than Tom and less practiced at navigating bureaucratic hierarchy. It's just that the errors are increasing in frequency. If authentication goes down during business hours. Graham raised one hand like a traffic cop, the gesture so automatic it suggested years of cutting people off mid-sentence. The system is not going down. The monitoring tools are overcalibrated, throwing false positives. I'll push a patch when I have bandwidth. For now, document what you're seeing and continue with your assigned work. His attention turned back to Ezra, and there was something in the way he looked, not quite suspicion, but certainly attention where there had been none before. Maintenance. Why are you standing around discussing systems that are none of your concern? Ezra felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the physical manifestation of powerlessness he'd learned to recognize over 4 years. He could explain that he'd been trying to help, but helping implied knowledge, and knowledge invited questions he couldn't afford to answer. I wasn't, sir. Just cleaning. I apologize if I overstepped. Graham took a step closer, deliberately entering Ezra's personal space in a way that forced Ezra to either step back or stand his ground. Stepping back meant submission. Standing ground meant confrontation. Ezra stood still. Your job is cleaning, not listening to engineering discussions, not offering technical opinions on systems you know nothing about. Just cleaning. Do I need to be clearer about your responsibilities? The words were calm, professional, delivered without raised voice or obvious anger. But the subtext underneath was unmistakable, amplified by the way Graham held eye contact for 2 seconds too long, by the microscopic pause before cleaning that transformed it from job description into something diminishing. No, sir. I understand completely. Graham held the eye contact 2 seconds longer, making sure the lesson had been learned, then turned to Tom and Lisa with a different expression, entirely paternal, rather than dismissive. Get back to work. And remember, if you can't fix something, escalate it properly through channels instead of discussing it with maintenance staff. He walked away, footsteps deliberate on the industrial carpet. Tom and Lisa exchanged glances but didn't speak. After a moment, they returned to their monitors, the conversation effectively terminated. Ezra pushed his cart toward the elevator, hands gripping the handle harder than necessary, knuckles showing tension he couldn't quite suppress. He'd been invisible for 30 months, carefully maintained that invisibility through 30 months of seeing things and saying nothing, and in 3 minutes he'd made himself visible. Being visible had reminded him exactly why invisibility mattered, why it was safer to watch preventable failures happen than to speak up and become a target. Behind him, he heard Lisa whisper something to Tom. Tom's response was too low to make out, but the tone carried sympathy, maybe embarrassment at having witnessed what had just happened. Ezra pressed the elevator button and waited, watching the numbers descend, 17, 16, 15. While he waited, his eyes found the building directory mounted beside the elevator, one of those displays showing which departments occupied which floors. 14th floor, 8, security and infrastructure. Department head, Graham Rutherford, VP. The elevator arrived with a quiet chime. Ezra pulled his cart inside and let the doors close, returning him to the private space where he could drop the expression of professional neutrality and acknowledge what he'd just felt, not fear exactly, but recognition. Recognition of how power worked, of how easily someone with authority could make you smaller, of how quickly speaking up could become a threat that needed to be neutralized. 4 more hours on his shift. 4 more hours of being invisible, of seeing things and saying nothing, of cleaning up other people's messes and pretending not to understand the systems he'd once helped design. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. He'd keep his head down, collect his paycheck, survive another day. That was the only plan that mattered. At 12:17 a.m., Ezra was emptying trash on the 15th floor when he noticed the panel. Mounted outside the server room, a touchscreen displaying real-time system status. Normally, it showed steady green, all systems nominal. Simple, reassuring, the kind of display that let managers check status without actually entering the server room. He'd walked past it hundreds of times over 30 months without more than a glance, registering green and moving on. Tonight it was flashing red. Authentication failure. System lockout countdown. Critical error. Manual override required timer 240 seconds, 239, 238. Ezra stopped. Authentication failure meant someone had tried accessing the server room with invalid credentials. Lockout countdown meant security protocol was engaging, would seal the room completely, requiring physical manual override to reopen. Standard security practice for critical infrastructure. Nothing unusual about the protocol itself, but 240 seconds was unusually short. Most systems gave 5 minutes minimum for IT staff to respond. And the door to the server room, the heavy security door that should have been sealed or fully open, was slightly ajar. Not open, not closed. Ajar maybe 3 inches, held in place by the automatic lock mechanism, struggling against a door that hadn't fully closed. Ezra looked down the corridor both ways. Empty. The 15th floor was executive territory corner, offices, conference rooms, the CEO's suite. No one worked up here after 6 p.m. except during quarterly earnings season. He pulled out his phone and called the main security desk, the number he'd been given 30 months ago, for exactly this kind of situation. 8 rings, then voicemail. He called again. 8 rings. Voicemail. The countdown continued. 201. 200. 199. Ezra made a decision he knew would probably end badly but couldn't quite bring himself to avoid. The part of him that was still a cybersecurity architect, that understood exactly what a countdown like this meant, that couldn't stand by and watch critical systems fail, that part made the decision for him. He pushed the door open. The server room was cold, maintained at a constant 62 degrees, regardless of outside temperature. Server racks lined both walls, LEDs blinking in patterns that represented data flow network traffic, the digital heartbeat of the company. The hum was constant mechanical white noise that some engineers found soothing and others found oppressive. Ezra had always found it centering proof of systems working, of order maintained. The diagnostic panel inside showed detailed readouts: OAuth token validation error, time synchronization failure detected, refresh protocol aborted, system entering protective lockdown to prevent security compromise. Exactly what he'd told Tom and Lisa 3 hours earlier. The vulnerability Graham had dismissed as false positive, the timing issue that only needed 20 minutes to fix, now cascading into something bigger, triggering lockdown protocols that would keep the authentication system offline for hours, while IT staff manually reset everything. Ezra looked at the detailed error log scrolling up the diagnostic screen. The problem had started at 11:47 p.m., 30 minutes before he had entered this room. Someone, probably Graham himself, had triggered an authentication request that failed due to the timing mismatch. That single failure had snowballed through dependent systems, each failure triggering additional authentication attempts, each attempt failing and triggering lockdown protocols, until the entire authentication infrastructure began shutting itself down to prevent what it interpreted as a coordinated attack. He pulled out his phone and started photographing the diagnostic panel, documenting error codes, timestamps, the exact failure sequence. This was evidence. If this went sideways, if someone tried blaming him for this, he wanted proof that the malfunction had started before he arrived, that he'd done nothing except document what he found. Behind him, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Quick footsteps, someone moving with purpose. Ezra turned. Graham Rutherford stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor lights, his expression cycling through surprise to recognition to calculation in the space of 2 seconds. Calloway. What the hell are you doing in here? Ezra's mouth went dry. His brain cycled through responses at high speed, discarding each as inadequate. Tell the truth about what he'd found that would raise questions about how he knew what to look for. Lie that would make everything worse when the security logs were reviewed. The panel outside was flashing. Countdown to lockdown. The door was open. I thought someone might be inside, might need help. Graham stepped into the room, his body language shifting from surprise to something more controlled. He positioned himself between Ezra and the door, blocking the exit, whether consciously or unconsciously. Ezra couldn't tell. You have zero authorization to be in this room. Do you understand what you just did? This is a level 7 secure area. Your badge is level 2. You violated security protocols. I didn't touch anything. I was documenting the error codes, the timeline. I thought it would need you triggered a critical security event. You entered a restricted area without clearance during an active malfunction. That makes you a suspect. The malfunction started before I entered. The timestamps show it clearly. 11:47 p.m. I entered at 12:17. That's 30 minutes? Graham moved to the diagnostic panel and tapped the screen, his fingers moving with practiced familiarity. The display changed, showing a different view of the logs. Ezra couldn't see the details from where he stood, but he saw Graham's expression shift, saw calculation happening behind his eyes, saw the exact moment Graham understood what had actually happened and what he needed to do about it. The logs show you in this room at the exact time the authentication system failed, because I came in after it had started failing. Look at the entry timestamp, 12:17 a.m. The failures began at 11:47, 30 minutes earlier. The security cameras will show Graham's hand moved across the screen in ways Ezra couldn't quite track. When he turned back, his expression had settled into something cold and final. What I see Calloway is a janitor who violated security protocol. What I see is someone in this room during a critical malfunction. What I see is a liability that needs to be addressed immediately. He pulled out his phone. This is Rutherford. I need security to the 15th floor server room immediately. Code 7 situation. Suspect in custody. He ended the call and looked at Ezra. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Don't say anything. Security will be here in 2 minutes. Ezra stood very still, phone in his hand, pulse hammering hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. He understood what was happening with perfect clarity. He'd lived through this exact scenario before, different building, different person, same fundamental architecture of blame. Graham was going to frame him, had already started the process, would finish it within 24 hours. And Ezra, standing in a server room he wasn't authorized to enter, holding a phone full of photographs he had no legitimate reason to have taken, had no way to stop it. The countdown on the diagnostic panel reached 0. The authentication system locked down completely. Somewhere in the building, hundreds of access badges stopped working, doors stopped opening, login screens stopped accepting credentials. Graham looked at the screen, then at Ezra, and something in his expression almost looked like satisfaction. You just cost this company 6 figures in emergency response and lost productivity. I hope cleaning toilets was worth it. Ezra said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make this worse. So he stood still and waited for security to arrive, knowing that tomorrow morning he'd be in an HR office, knowing how this story would end because he'd lived this story before and the ending never changed. The only difference this time was the photographs on his phone, evidence that might matter if anyone bothered to look at it. But powerful people didn't lose to janitors. That was the lesson he'd learned at TechBridge. That was the lesson he was about to learn again. The apartment felt different in daylight, smaller limitations more obvious. Morning sun through blinds that didn't quite close properly revealed every crack in the walls, every stain on the carpet the landlord had promised to replace 3 years ago. Ezra sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, eviction notice, centered like evidence at a crime scene. 10 days remaining. The number had a bureaucratic precision that made it feel both distant and immediate, like watching a storm approach across empty prairie. His phone showed a message from an unknown number received at 6:47 a.m. Internal audit Fortress Dynamics. Need to discuss December 15th incident. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Thinking Cup on Tremont. Robert Kim. Ezra stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Internal audit wanted to talk to him. Not HR wanting him to sign additional termination paperwork. Not security following up on the incident. Internal audit, which meant someone was questioning the official narrative. He typed confirmation with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. Then he opened the server room photographs on his laptop and began the methodical work of backing them up. 3 cloud services, Google Drive, Dropbox, a private server he maintained under a pseudonym. Evidence disappeared when it was convenient for powerful people. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly. The timestamps told their story and Absolute's malfunction began. 11:47 p.m., his entry. 17 a.m., 30 minutes. Math didn't lie even when people did. He started building a spreadsheet, the kind of documentation he should have built at TechBridge instead of trusting that truth would be self-evident. Hour by hour, minute by minute. Where he'd been, what he'd done, who could verify? The 14th floor security cameras would show him cleaning at 11:50. The elevator logs would show his ascent at 12:14. But he didn't have access to those logs anymore. His credentials were dead. His badge deactivated, his name flagged in the system as a security threat. He was locked out of the very proof that could save him. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Zeph's school. His chest tightened. Phone calls from school during school hours were never good news. Mr. Calloway, this is Margaret Chen, the principal. There's been an incident involving your daughter. We need you to come in immediately. The secretary's voice was professionally careful, which meant whatever had happened was serious enough to require careful word choice. What kind of incident? There was a physical altercation. Your daughter is safe, but we need to discuss it in person. Can you come now? I'll be there in 20 minutes. He closed the laptop, grabbed his jacket, and headed out. The T station was 4 blocks away, the school another 3 stops. 23 minutes door to door if the trains were running on time. The principal's office smelled like anxiety masked with air freshener, that generic fresh linen scent that always reminded Ezra of hospitals and bureaucracy. Margaret Chen gestured him to the chair beside Zeph. His daughter sat very still, the way children do when they know they're in serious trouble, hands folded in her lap. Her arm showed a fresh bruise below the elbow, already darkening toward purple. Her face was streaked with dried tears, but her expression held something else underneath, not quite defiance, but certainly not regret. "Mr. Calloway, thank you for coming so quickly." Margaret's tone was the careful neutral of someone who delivered bad news to parents many times before. There was an incident at recess. Zeph pushed another student, Connor Morrison. He fell and scraped both hands. Pushing violates our conduct code regarding physical contact. Ezra looked at his daughter. Zeph didn't push people. 7 years and he'd never seen her raise a hand to anyone, never seen her respond to provocation with anything but words or tears or retreating into herself. What happened first? Margaret's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing the human underneath who understood that context mattered even when rules were rules. Connor said things about your termination from Fortress, and he made some racially coded statements about theft and employment. Ezra felt heat rise from his chest to his face, his hands wanting to curl into fists under the arms of the chair. He forced them flat against his thighs, forced his voice to stay level. What exactly did he say? Margaret glanced at Zeph, visibly weighing what to say in front of a 7-year-old about racism that 7-year-old had already experienced firsthand. Connor told several students that your father was fired for being a thief. He also made statements connecting black people generally with criminal behavior and unemployment. According to the playground monitor who intervened, he said his father told him these things. Where is Connor now? With his mother in the nurse's office getting his hands bandaged. Mr. Calloway, I understand your anger. Where is Connor's father? Margaret paused. I don't know. His mother came to pick him up. Will there be consequences for Connor? For the racist harassment, and we're addressing that separately. But I need to address the physical response first. Our zero-tolerance policy on violence is clear. I'm issuing Zeph a formal warning documented in her file. Not suspension, I have discretion there given the provocation. But if there is another physical incident, there will be more serious consequences. She's 7. She was defending herself and her family. I understand. And that context matters, which is why I'm not suspending her. But the rules exist for everyone's safety. I need you both to understand that. Ezra looked at Zeph, who was watching him with enormous eyes, waiting to see if her father would fight for her or tell her she'd been wrong, waiting to learn what lessons this moment would teach. I understand, he said, the words tasting like ash. And Zeph understands. Don't you, kiddo? Zeph nodded, but her expression suggested she understood something more complicated than what Margaret was teaching, understood that rules protected some people and constrained others, that speaking up had consequences, that being right didn't always matter when you lacked power. They left the principal's office through corridors decorated with student artwork and inspirational posters about kindness and respect. The irony was so thick, Ezra could taste it. In the car, neither spoke for 3 blocks. Then Ezra pulled into a parking lot, a closed gas station concrete, still showing oil stains, and turned to his daughter. Tell me what happened. All of it. Zeph's voice was small, each word carefully selected. Connor said you got fired because you're a thief. He said black dads always get fired because they steal things. That his dad told him black people take jobs they're not supposed to have and then steal. That you were probably a janitor because that's what black people do until they get fired for stealing. The fire in Ezra's chest threatened to consume rational thought. Some part of him wanted to drive back to that school, find Connor's father, make him understand what he'd taught his son and what that teaching had cost. But that impulse, that rage, was exactly what people like Connor's father expected, exactly what would confirm their narrative. What did you do? I told him you didn't steal anything, that you were fired because someone lied. He laughed and said, that's what criminals always say. So I pushed him. Ezra breathed slowly, counting to 5 on the inhale, 5 on the exhale, the breathing technique Naomi had taught him years ago when work stress threatened to overwhelm him. Baby, what Connor said isn't true. I got fired because someone lied about me to cover their own mistakes. That's not about being black. That's about one person making a bad choice to protect himself. Then why did Connor's dad say it's about being black because some people judge without knowing truth? They make assumptions based on stereotypes because it's easier than thinking. They teach their children those assumptions, and the children don't know any better. But we never let them define us. We define ourselves by what we do, how we treat people, whether we tell truth, even when it's hard. Zeph wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Why don't you just prove them wrong? Prove you didn't steal anything. Ezra felt something crack behind his ribs. Out of the mouths of children, the question was so simple, so direct, cutting through all the complexity to the heart of things. I'm trying, baby. I promise I'm trying. The inadequacy of that answer hung between them. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to understand institutional power, shouldn't have to learn how systems protected some people while crushing others. But Zeph was learning anyway through bruises and taunts and watching her father come home smelling like disinfectant every morning. We're going to be okay, he said, another necessary lie to preserve what remained of her childhood. I'm meeting with someone tomorrow who might be able to help. Someone from the company who's asking questions. Questions about whether what happened to me was fair. Zeph processed this with the seriousness she brought to complex ideas. Will they believe you? I don't know, but I'm going to give them evidence they can't ignore. He drove her back to school, walked her to the office, made sure she'd be allowed back to class. The secretary was kind, which somehow made it worse kindness, as consolation prize when what you needed was justice. That night, after Zeph was asleep, Ezra opened LinkedIn and started searching. He needed to know if this pattern was real, if Graham Rutherford had done this before, if there were others like him who'd been blamed for failures they'd warned about. He searched Fortress Dynamics terminated employees IT department, found Isaac Webb on page 2, network administrator terminated 18 months prior. Georgia Tech electrical engineering and computer science degrees, strong career trajectory until Fortress. Then nothing, a gap in employment that every recruiter would notice and ask about, probably getting the same answer Ezra gave. I was wrongfully terminated, but I can't discuss the details. Ezra sent a connection request with a brief message. I was terminated from Fortress 3 days ago for a system failure I'd warned management about. Your profile suggests something similar may have happened to you. Would you be willing to talk? I'm building documentation for internal audit. The reply came within 15 minutes. Coffee tomorrow, same place you're meeting audit. 10 a.m. We should talk before you meet Robert Kim. Isaac Ezra stared at that message. Isaac knew he was meeting Robert, which meant either Isaac had contacts inside the audit department or the audit investigation was broader than Ezra had realized, or both. He typed back, 10 a.m. works. How did you know about the meeting? The response was almost immediate, because Robert called me yesterday asking about my termination. Whatever you told Victoria must have hit a nerve. See you tomorrow. Ezra closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his apartment, listening to Zeph's quiet breathing from the couch. Tomorrow he'd meet Isaac, learn whether this pattern was real. Tomorrow he'd meet Robert, learn whether Victoria's interest translated into actual investigation or just corporate risk management. Tomorrow he'd either take the first step toward vindication or learn that fighting back was as futile as it had been at TechBridge. He looked at Naomi's photograph in the dim light. I'm trying, baby. For Zeph. For me. For whoever Graham does this to next if no one stops him. The photograph didn't answer, but he imagined her voice anyway. It's higher than the towers is. Bigger than just us. Across Boston, Graham Rutherford sat in his home office at 11 p.m. staring at an email notification that had arrived 3 minutes ago. Access alert. Robert Kim internal audit has accessed your system logs email. Archive modification history. Session duration 47 minutes. Status ongoing. His hands went cold. He pulled up his phone and called Andrew Chen, the junior counsel in legal. He'd helped get hired 2 years back. Andrew answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Graham, it's 11 at night. What's wrong? Can internal audit access my email without notice? Without telling me they're investigating? Andrew's voice sharp and sleep falling away. If it's a formal investigation triggered by a credible complaint, yes. They have broad authority. Do you know what triggered it? Graham thought about the janitor. Oh, not janitor anymore. The terminated maintenance worker, who'd been standing in that server room with his phone out taking photographs. The one who'd apparently known enough about OAuth vulnerabilities to explain them to Tom and Lisa. The one whose personnel file, when Graham had pulled it the next day, had shown an MIT computer science degree. There was a termination. Employee claims wrongful accusation. He may have filed a complaint with someone. If he filed a complaint with audit or the CEO, that would trigger investigation. Do you have documentation supporting your termination decision? Graham looked at his computer, at the summary reports he'd filed with HR, at the statements he'd written. At the timestamps, he'd been very careful about when characterizing Callaway's badge access. I have thorough documentation. Then cooperate fully with audit. Answer questions, provide requested materials, don't obstruct. Unless there's something in your documentation that contradicts your official statements. The question hung heavy. Andrew was asking without asking. Did you lie in your reports? Everything's accurate to my knowledge and belief. To your knowledge and belief is different from accurate, Graham. If there are discrepancies between your reports and the raw data, there aren't. The lie came smoothly practiced. He'd been telling variations of this lie for 3 years every time a system failed and he needed someone to blame, every time a bug he'd dismissed turned into a crisis. Then you're fine. But Graham, if audit finds evidence of falsification, you need to tell me immediately, before they formalize findings. That's the only chance for damage control. After the call ended, Graham opened his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive, started copying files, emails, modification records, the actual timestamps from the authentication system, his conversation threads with Tom and Lisa about the OAuth bug they kept reporting. Everything that might be useful if things went wrong. Because things were going wrong. He could feel the architecture of his carefully managed career beginning to shift, could feel cracks forming in foundations he'd thought solid. The problem was Callaway, a janitor who wasn't just a janitor, who apparently had the technical knowledge to understand exactly what had failed and why, who'd been smart enough to photograph evidence before Graham arrived. A janitor who'd found someone willing to listen. Graham pulled up Victoria Ashford's recent emails to the board, found the one sent at 7:23 a.m. subject emergency board session, scheduled, December 19th, 10 a.m. 2 days away. Emergency session with less than 48 hours notice meant something serious. Meant Victoria had seen something in the audit findings that required immediate board action. Graham opened his email and started drafting his resignation letter. Not to submit, not yet, but to have ready, just in case the board meeting went badly. Better to resign with dignity than be terminated for cause. Better to control the narrative as pursuing other opportunities than have terminated for falsifying records on his employment history. He saved the draft, encrypted it, and copied it to the flash drive. Then he sat in the darkness and waited for morning, knowing that tomorrow would determine whether 15 years of building his career had been worth anything or whether one janitor's documentation would bring it all down. The thinking cup smelled like espresso and ambition, that particular combination of coffee and laptop-warmed air that characterized every cafe in Boston where people worked remotely or held informal business meetings. Isaac Webb was already seated when Ezra arrived at 10, occupying a corner table exactly matching his LinkedIn photo. 38 years old, glasses, careful posture that suggested someone who'd learned to take up minimal space. Ezra got coffee black because adding cream and sugar cost extra and sat across from him. Isaac spoke without preamble. Let me guess, system malfunction after hours server room. Rutherford caught you there and blamed you for causing it. The accuracy was unsettling. How did you know? Because that's exactly what happened to me. Database crash October 2 years ago. I'd been reporting synchronization errors for 3 weeks. He marked them low priority, said they were acceptable variants. System failed during a major client demo. He found me trying to restore from backup at 2 a.m., blamed me for sabotage. Ezra felt something click into place, that moment of recognition when pattern becomes visible. Did you fight it? Isaac pulled out his phone, showed email chains. Bug reports detailed technical explanations. Graham's dismissals marked in red. Low priority, acceptable variants. No action required. Stop escalating minor issues. I took it to HR. They said Rutherford's assessment carried more weight than mine. Said I'd been insubordinate by continuing to escalate after being told to drop it. Terminated for negligence and insubordination. 2 years with the company gone. Ezra opened his laptop and showed his spreadsheet. I'm building a case. If you still have access to historical data, Isaac's expression shifted to something almost like hope. I have read-only access to legacy databases. They never fully purged my credentials when they terminated me. I can pull historical bug tracking, data termination records, demographic information if it's relevant. Why didn't you use it before? Why not fight back? Isaac looked into his coffee cup. Fear, bills, not wanting to make enemies in an industry where everyone knows everyone. But last month, my nephew started applying to engineering programs, asked me about Fortress, whether it was a good company to work for. I had to explain why I got fired, had to watch him wonder if his uncle was competent or just making excuses. Don't want him thinking this is normal. Don't want him learning to stay quiet when he sees problems. Send me whatever you can access. I'm meeting internal audit this afternoon. There's someone else. Dominic Cross fired about a year ago. Marcus Thorne 3 years back. I've been doing research since Robert Kim called me. Same pattern, all of us reported bugs. Rutherford dismissed them, systems failed, we got blamed. Ezra added the names to his spreadsheet. 4 men. Four identical terminations. The pattern was becoming undeniable. This isn't coincidence. Isaac studied the data. No, but proving it, I talked to a lawyer about filing a discrimination complaint. He said without explicit racial animus, without Rutherford using slurs or documented statements about race, we'd have a hard time. Said pattern alone isn't enough. What if it's not primarily about race? What if it's about incompetence? Isaac leaned forward, interested. Explain. Every failure you described originated from bugs that existed before you touched the systems. Bugs. Rutherford ignored despite warnings. Systems failed because of his negligence. Then he blamed whoever was closest and easiest to discredit. Isaac's eyes widened slightly. So he's incompetent using racism as a tool as the method of selecting scapegoats, which makes him responsible either way. We're not proving he's consciously prejudiced. We're proving he covers his failures by scapegoating people who can't fight back. And he consistently chooses black employees for that role, whether consciously or unconsciously. You have evidence, photographs with timestamps, bug reports, but I need audit logs, bug tracking history over multiple years. Rutherford's pattern of responses. And I don't have credentials anymore. I can export from legacy systems. I'll send you everything tonight, every bug report, every termination, every email I can access. 3 years of data. They exchanged contact information. As Isaac stood to leave, he paused. Thank you. For 18 months, I've been wondering if I was crazy. If maybe Rutherford was right, maybe I had caused that failure somehow. Having someone else see the pattern, it matters more than you know. You're not crazy. The system is broken, and Rutherford learned how to exploit it. But we're going to document it thoroughly enough that even broken systems have to acknowledge truth. After Isaac left, Ezra sat with his cooling coffee and opened his laptop. Started building the framework for a presentation. Not just proving Graham lied about one incident. Proving Graham had been lying for years, destroying careers systematically to cover incompetence. His phone buzzed. Text from Isaac Dominic's number. He wants to talk. Call him after your audit meeting. Then another text, data export in progress. So, we'll email encrypted file by 8 p.m. tonight. 847 bug reports, termination, records, response time analysis by employee race. Pattern is statistically significant. Ezra allowed himself the first moment of hope since the termination. Statistical significance meant pattern too clear to dismiss as coincidence. Pattern meant evidence. Evidence meant possibility. He looked at Naomi's photograph on his phone lock screen. We're building something, baby. Something that might actually matter. Victoria Ashford stood at her office window watching planes descend toward Logan, the afternoon sun cutting through glass at angles that made her squint. Behind her, Robert Kim sat at her conference table reviewing his laptop preliminary audit findings displayed across multiple windows. The logs support Callaway's account completely. Server room access at 12:17 a.m. Malfunction started at 11:47. That's a 30-minute discrepancy from Rutherford's official report. What about Rutherford's claim? The badge scan at 11:50 doesn't exist. I checked raw access logs from 3 independent systems. Badge reader database, security camera timestamps, server access logs. Callaway's badge wasn't scanned anywhere on the 15th floor until 12:17. Rutherford's claim is either catastrophically wrong or deliberately false. Robert closed his laptop with deliberate care. There's more. I found 3 previous terminations with similar patterns. All black men, all system incidents. All had filed bug reports that Rutherford dismissed prior to failure. Victoria turned from the window. Names Isaac Webb, Network Administrator, terminated 18 months ago. Dominic Cross, Systems Engineer, terminated 12 months ago. Marcus Thorne, Security Analyst, terminated 3 years ago. I've pulled their termination files, bug tracking history. Rutherford's responses. The pattern is consistent across all 4 cases. That's not coincidence. Could be argued as such by Rutherford's lawyers. Different systems, different circumstances, different timeframes. But no, I don't believe it's coincidence. Either Rutherford is deliberately targeting black employees or he's opportunistically using them as scapegoats when he needs someone to blame. Victoria opened her desk drawer and looked at Andrew's photograph. 23 graduation day, 3 months before the warehouse fired him for reporting safety violations. Before he spent 6 months unable to find work. Before he drove into a concrete barrier at 90 miles per hour. Build a case that's airtight. I want documentation so thorough that Rutherford's lawyers tell him to settle rather than let this go to discovery. That'll tip him off that we're investigating. He'll have time to prepare defenses, possibly destroy evidence. Victoria's reflection in the window showed something cold and determined. Good. Let him know. Let him panic. Panicked people make mistakes. You want him to make mistakes? I want him to understand that this time someone's actually checking. That he picked the wrong person to frame, and now everything he's done is going to come to light. Robert studied her. This is personal for you. Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Andrew's photograph, at his smile frozen in time, at the hope in his eyes, that the world was fair, that reporting problems was the right thing to do, that truth mattered. Yes, she finally said. It's personal. Graham's computer chimed with another access alert at 3:47 p.m. Access alert. Robert Kim internal audit has accessed bug tracking database termination files for Webcross Thorn. Session duration 22 minutes. Status ongoing. Webcross Thorn, all three of them. Robert was building a pattern case, looking across multiple terminations, assembling statistical evidence. His phone buzzed. Text from Diane Pembroke, HR Director. Board meeting Friday 10 a.m. Your attendance mandatory. Victoria specifically requested. Bring documentation regarding Callaway termination and any other security-related terminations past 3 years. Graham stared at the text. Diane knew exactly what was coming. Her message was positioning herself to survive by following orders while subtly warning him that this was serious. The reference to any other security-related terminations meant they knew about Webcross and Thorn, meant they were looking at pattern. He typed back, "What's the meeting about?" 3 minutes passed, then personnel matter. Review of departmental practices. Come prepared to defend your decisions. Graham opened his email and pulled up the resignation letter draft. Read through it carefully. Added a paragraph about family health issues requiring his attention, about spending more time with his children. The standard exit narrative that would let him leave with dignity if the board meeting went badly. He looked at his wife's photograph on the desk, at his children's graduation photos framed on the credenza. The house they'd bought last year, the college funds he'd been building, the retirement account that was finally approaching where it should be for someone his age, all of it built on this job, this title, this authority. All of it resting on Friday's board meeting. He pulled up his personal files and started reviewing every email, every decision, every statement he'd made about Callaway and the others. Looking for inconsistencies, for statements that could be taken out of context, for evidence that could be reinterpreted as falsification. There was more than he'd remembered. Small things, timestamps rounded to nearest 5 minutes, instead of exact summaries that emphasized certain details while omitting others' characterizations of employee competence that relied on subjective judgment rather than objective metrics. Individually, each could be explained as reasonable interpretation. Collectively, they might look like pattern. Graham saved everything to the flash drive and ejected it, put it in his pocket. Insurance in case he needed to prove he'd kept records, that he hadn't destroyed evidence. Then he sat in his office and waited for the rest of the business day to pass, watching the clock count down toward Friday morning. The thinking cup was less crowded at 2 p.m., the lunch rush having passed, the afternoon workers with laptops crowd, not yet fully settled in. Robert Kim arrived precisely on time, briefcase in hand, the kind of methodical punctuality that suggested former military or just extreme professionalism. Thank you for meeting, Mr. Callaway. I'm reviewing your termination as part of a broader audit. I'd like to hear your account of December 15th in your own words. Ezra pulled out his folder, printed documentation because digital could be dismissed as potentially altered. The timeline, the OAuth vulnerability he'd observed, his conversation with Tom and Lisa Graham's dismissal of the bug reports. The server room panel flashing the door ajar, his decision to enter. His photographs documenting errors that started 30 minutes before his arrival. Robert took notes in a leather notebook, asked clarifying questions, revealed nothing about his own findings. Your account matches the raw system logs exactly. Rutherford's claim about 1150 badge access isn't supported by any of the security databases. Then why did he tell HR that that's what I'm working to determine? Could be honest error or deliberate misrepresentation. I'm examining which is more likely. Ezra opened his laptop and showed the spreadsheet with 4 names. It's not error, it's pattern. Robert studied the data, his expression carefully neutral, but something shifting behind his eyes. I found the same pattern independently. Either Rutherford has extraordinarily bad luck with black employees, or he's systematically using them as scapegoats for his own failures. Does intent matter? Either way, he destroyed careers to cover incompetence. Robert pulled out his own laptop and opened files. Victoria is prepared to move on this. If my findings support your account, which they do comprehensively, she's calling an emergency board meeting. Will you testify? Present your evidence directly to the board? Ezra felt something fragile and dangerous. Hope. Yes, you'll need to be prepared. Rutherford will fight back hard. He'll claim you're disgruntled, that you violated protocols regardless of the timeline, that this is selective interpretation of ambiguous data. I have evidence, photographs, timestamps, bug tracking, history. Isaac Webb is sending me tonight. Evidence is necessary but not sufficient. You'll be in a room with 12 board members who've worked with Rutherford for years, who've trusted him with critical systems. You'll need to present your case clearly, professionally, irrefutably. You'll need to make them see the pattern, not just defend your individual case. Robert pulled out a business card. One more thing. Victoria mentioned you worked at Tech Bridge Systems. I ran a background check standard for audit investigations. Warren Caldwell, your former supervisor there, is under FBI investigation for falsifying audit reports at his new employer. Multiple counts, looking at serious prison time. Ezra's hands tightened on his coffee cup. So I was right. He did falsify the logs at Tech Bridge. You were right. And you paid the price for 4 years while he continued the same behavior at 2 more companies. But the FBI is building a comprehensive case. If they find evidence he falsified records at Tech Bridge, which seems highly likely given his pattern, that could trigger automatic review of your termination there. How long FBI investigations could be, months or years. But meanwhile, Victoria is prepared to offer you a position at Fortress if the board findings support your account. Not maintenance, something appropriate to your actual qualifications. Why? Robert's professional expression softened slightly. Because her brother was in your position once. Different circumstances, same fundamental dynamic. Someone with power destroyed him for speaking truth. She's been waiting 6 years for a chance to use her own authority correctly to actually protect someone instead of watching them get destroyed. What do I need to do? Be at Fortress headquarters Friday morning at 10. Bring your documentation. Be prepared to present to the board. And Mr. Calloway, this is bigger than your termination. You're exposing 3 years of systematic failure. 4 men destroyed. Pattern of discrimination or negligence or both. The board needs to understand the full scope. I understand. One more thing. Rutherford knows something is happening. He'll try defensive moves between now and Friday. Be ready for anything. That evening at 6:37, Ezra's doorbell rang. He looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers, both in uniform, expressions professionally neutral. He opened the door. Ezra Calloway, yeah, we received a complaint about unauthorized computer access. Someone reported you hacked into Fortress Dynamics systems, accessing secure databases without authorization. That's computer fraud under Massachusetts law. The floor tilted. Ezra's brain cycled through responses at high speed, all of them inadequate. What? The taller officer checked his notes. Complaint filed by Graham Rutherford, VP of IT Security at Fortress. Claims you've been accessing company systems after your termination, downloading proprietary data. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, state and federal charges possible. The CEO gave me temporary access credentials for an internal audit investigation. I can prove it. Let me call her. His hands shook as he dialed Victoria's number. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Ashford, this is Ezra Calloway. I have 2 police officers here. Graham Rutherford filed a complaint saying I hacked into Fortress systems. Victoria's voice went tight with barely controlled fury. Put me on speaker. Ezra held out his phone. Victoria's voice filled the small entryway. This is Victoria Ashford, CEO of Fortress Dynamics. Mr. Calloway has temporary audit credentials that I personally authorized. He has explicit permission to access specific databases for an active internal investigation. Mr. Rutherford filed a false complaint. If you need written verification, I can email official documentation within 5 minutes. The officers exchanged glances. The taller one spoke into his radio, stepped away for a brief conversation. When he returned, his expression had shifted. Ma'am, we'll need that documentation for our report, but we're not making an arrest. Mr. Calloway, you're free. We apologize for the confusion. After they left, Ezra stood in his doorway, adrenaline still spiking through his system. Zeph appeared from her room where she'd been hiding, eyes enormous. Dad, are you going to jail? The question broke something in him. No 7-year-old should have to ask that question about her father twice in one day. No, baby. Someone lied about me. Again. Again, the word carried the weight of recognition of pattern learned too young again. But this time I'm going to prove them wrong. I promise. He sat beside her on the couch and pulled her close. She buried her face in his shoulder, not crying, but holding on with the fierce grip of someone who'd learned that people you loved could be taken away. After she fell asleep, Ezra stared at the eviction notice. 6 days remaining. He could give up now, take the settlement Fortress had offered, sign another NDA, move on. Or he could fight. His phone buzzed. Text from Isaac Webb. Just sent encrypted export. 847 bug reports across 3 years. Demographic breakdown, response times, resolution rates by employee race. Pattern is statistically significant at P0.001. You've got them. Ezra opened his laptop and downloaded the files. Started analyzing data, building the presentation. Not just proving Graham lied about one incident. Proving Graham had been lying for 3 years, destroying careers systematically. By 2 a.m. he had the framework. By 4 he had evidence organized. By 6, when Zeph woke up, he had 147 pages of documentation. Morning, Dad. You didn't sleep? Couldn't. Big day Friday. The meeting. Are you scared, terrified? Mom would say you're brave. Naomi's voice echoed across 4 years. It's higher than the towers, Ez, bigger than just us. She'd say it's higher than the towers, bigger than just our family. What does that mean? It means some things matter more than winning or losing. When we do the right thing, even when it's hard, it helps people we'll never meet. It changes how the world works just a little bit. Zeph hugged him. You're going to win, Dad. Graham met with Diane Thursday morning at 9, reviewing termination files in her office. The pattern was visible, even to him. Now 8 black employees in 3 years, all system incidents, all following bug reports he'd dismissed. This looks very bad, Graham. It's selective interpretation. Systems fail. Employees make mistakes. The fact that some of them happen to be black doesn't imply discrimination. Diane closed the folder. The board meeting's tomorrow at 10. You need to be prepared. Victoria doesn't call emergency sessions lightly, and she's angry. I've never seen her angry like this. What should I expect? Questions, scrutiny, possibly accusations. Bring everything you have documenting your decisions. Every email, every bug report, every performance review. If there are gaps in your documentation, they'll exploit them. After she left, Graham pulled up his resignation letter again. Read it through one more time. The words looked right, dignified, gracious, focused on family rather than fleeing consequences. He added his signature at the bottom, dated it for Friday, saved it in his drafts folder. 15 years at this company. 15 years of surviving restructurings, budget cuts, personnel changes. He'd always survived by being careful, by controlling narratives, by making sure someone else was available to blame when things went wrong. But he'd made a mistake with Callaway, had seen the janitor uniform and assumed ignorance, had assumed no one would believe a maintenance worker over a VP, had assumed wrong, and now a janitor's photographs might bring down everything he'd built. Graham looked at the clock. 24 hours until the board meeting. 24 hours to prepare the best defense he could manage, or to decide whether resignation with dignity beat termination for cause. The screen flickered back to life, showing the boardroom in real time. 12 faces turned toward Ezra Callaway, who stood at the end of the table with the dossier open before him. He wore the charcoal suit, the navy tie, hands steady now. 3 months of preparation had burned away the uncertainty. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Victoria gave him a small nod. The floor was his. December 15th, eerie 11:47 p.m. The authentication system at Fortress Dynamics experienced cascade failure in the OAuth token refresh protocol. This failure was not caused by external attack or hardware malfunction. It was caused by a configuration change made by Graham Rutherford at 11:35 p.m. that same evening. He advanced to the next page, server logs with timestamps highlighted in yellow. These are the raw access logs. They show Mr. Rutherford's badge accessing the server room at 11:30, his system modifications at 11:35. The first error codes appearing at 11:47, exactly 12 minutes after his changes went live. Graham shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. The board members leaned forward, some reaching for the printed dossiers, others studying the screen. The change was subtle. He adjusted the token time to live from 360 seconds to 300, trying to improve performance. But he failed to update the refresh trigger, which remained at 295 seconds. This created a 5-second race condition. When system latency exceeded that window, tokens expired before refresh could engage, and authentication cascaded into lockdown. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, spoke up. "Mr. Calloway, how did you obtain these technical details? I observed the error pattern 3 weeks before the incident. Mentioned it to two engineers, Tom Wheeler and Lisa Brennan, who confirmed they'd already reported it to Mr. Rutherford multiple times. He dismissed their reports as false positives." Continue. At 12:17 a.m., I entered the server room. The door was propped open. The diagnostic panel was flashing lockdown warning. I documented the errors with my phone. These are those photographs. He displayed the images on screen, diagnostic panel timestamps, error messages cascading down the display in patterns any cybersecurity professional would recognize. Mr. Rutherford arrived 3 minutes later. He accused me of causing the malfunction, but the timestamps prove it began 30 minutes before I entered. The question is why Mr. Rutherford claimed otherwise. The general counsel adjusted her glasses. Mr. Rutherford stated in his termination report that badge logs showed your access at 11:50 p.m. Are you disputing that I'm saying it doesn't exist? The raw logs show no badge activity from me on the 15th floor until 12:17. Mr. Rutherford either misread the data or deliberately misrepresented it. Graham's voice cut through sharp and defensive. The summary reports I reviewed showed different timestamps. I acted on available information under crisis conditions. Ezra met his eyes directly. Summary reports can be filtered. Raw logs cannot. And this isn't the first time you've made this particular mistake. He advanced to the next section, showing 4 names in a table with dates, positions, and termination reasons aligned in columns. Isaac Webb, terminated 18 months ago for database synchronization failure. He'd filed bug reports for 3 weeks, all marked by Mr. Rutherford as low priority. When the system crashed during a client demo, Mr. Rutherford blamed Mr. Webb. Ezra clicked to the next page, showing email chains with Graham's handwritten notes clearly visible. Here are Mr. Webb's warnings. Here are Mr. Rutherford's dismissals. Here is the termination report claiming Mr. Webb caused the failure through negligence. Another click. Dominic Cross, terminated 12 months ago for a memory leak that brought down client services. He'd reported it 4 weeks in advance. Mr. Rutherford marked it resolved without fixing it. When the system failed, Mr. Cross was blamed and terminated. The pattern was visible now, undeniable to anyone looking. Marcus Thorne, terminated 3 years ago for database lock vulnerability. Same pattern. Warning ignored, system failed, employee blamed. The CFO, a man in his 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on his forehead, set down his tablet. These are serious allegations. You're essentially accusing Mr. Rutherford of systematically framing employees to cover his own failures. I'm presenting evidence. The conclusions are yours to draw. Ezra pulled up organizational data with demographic breakdowns highlighted. All 4 terminated employees are Black men. In a department that processed 47 terminations over 3 years, 8 were Black employees, 17% of terminations from a demographic representing 9% of the technical workforce. Of those 8 Black employees terminated, 4 were terminated for system incidents that originated from bugs Mr. Rutherford had personally dismissed. The silence in the room was absolute. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. The silver-haired board member spoke again, her voice noticeably colder. "Mr. Rutherford, do you have a response to these allegations?" Graham stood, hands gripping the back of his chair with enough force that his knuckles showed white. This is cherry-picked analysis. System failures happen in any IT organization. Employees make mistakes. The fact that some of those employees happen to be Black doesn't mean I'm targeting them. It means I'm enforcing professional standards equally across all demographics. Ezra remained standing, voice level and calm. You're not enforcing standards equally. You're enforcing them selectively. When white employees report bugs, you assign them to your team for fixing. When Black employees report bugs, you dismiss them. Then when those bugs cause failures, you blame the people who warned you. That's a lie. Is it Ezra displayed bug tracking statistics, the numbers large enough to read from anywhere in the room? In 3 years, your department received 847 bug reports. Of those, 203 came from Black employees. You marked 156 as false positives or low priority. That's 77% dismissed. By contrast, you dismissed only 32% of bug reports from white employees. The numbers landed like artillery fire. Graham's face had gone pale, a faint sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. The board chairman, who'd been silent until now, turned to Robert Kim. Internal audit verified these figures. Robert opened his laptop with deliberate care. Verified and expanded. The pattern holds across multiple metrics: response time to bug reports, resource allocation for fixes, post-incident blame assignment. In every measurable category, Black employees in Mr. Rutherford's department received systematically different treatment than their white counterparts. The CFO nodded slowly. Several other board members exchanged meaningful glances. The room's energy was shifting not toward Ezra exactly, but away from Graham, towards something that looked like consensus. Victoria leaned forward slightly, and Ezra felt his chest tighten. She was about to give them an exit. The board should note that Mr. Calloway has no formal statistical training. These analyses, while compelling in their presentation, may reflect selection bias rather than actual discrimination. Statistical correlation, as we all know, doesn't necessarily imply causation. She was offering them a way out, a path to side with Graham without looking like they'd ignored evidence. Reasonable doubt, plausible interpretation, the kind of bureaucratic escape hatch that let powerful men survive. Ezra felt the room shift, saw it in body language, in the way the CFO sat back, slightly in the way two board members nodded, almost imperceptibly. 3 months of work, and it was slipping through his fingers like water. Graham seemed to sense the opening, standing taller. Ms. Ashford is correct. Mr. Calloway has assembled data points to support a predetermined narrative. That's not proof of discrimination, that's confirmation bias. I've been with this company 15 years. My record speaks for itself. The chairman set down his tablet and looked at Ezra. Mr. Calloway, do you have any evidence beyond statistical correlation? Any direct proof of discriminatory intent or deliberate falsification? This was it, the moment everything hinged on. The board wanted an easy answer, wanted to dismiss this as unfortunate coincidence, wanted to avoid the legal and reputational nightmare of acknowledging systematic discrimination. Ezra opened the final section of his dossier and placed a single document on the screen. An email from Graham to Diane Pembroke. Date December 16th, 7:23 a.m., 9 hours after Ezra's termination. The board members leaned forward, reading silently. The email was brief: Diane Calloway's situation resolved. Documenting it as security violation keeps us clean. The janitor won't fight it, and even if he does, who believes the black guy over the VP? Make sure the file reflects unauthorized access period. No mention of the OAuth issues he was talking about. We can't have a paper trail suggesting we knew about vulnerabilities and ignored them. GR. The silence that followed was different from before. Not thoughtful silence, but the kind of silence that comes when something unforgivable has been revealed. The kind of silence that precedes consequences. Graham's face went from pale to gray. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, without sound. The chairman turned to him with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that suggested rage carefully controlled. Mr. Rutherford, did you send this email? Graham's brain was visibly cycling through responses, weighing legal liability, searching for escape routes that didn't exist. That's out of context. I was under stress. The phrasing was poor, but the chairman's voice cut through like a blade. Did you send this email, yes or no? 5 seconds. 10. 15. 20 seconds of silence while 12 board members stared at Graham Rutherford and watched him understand that there was no good answer, that he'd destroyed himself with his own words. I may have. In the immediate aftermath, I was focused on resolving the crisis. Victoria stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You deliberately misrepresented evidence. You falsified a termination report. You documented a racist calculation in writing and asked HR to suppress evidence of negligence. Mr. Rutherford, effective immediately, your employment at Fortress Dynamics is terminated for cause. Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to collect personal items under supervision. Graham's head snapped up. You can't, I can, and I am. General Counsel will contact you regarding potential civil and criminal liability. If you attempt to contact any current employees about this matter, you will be in violation of your employment agreement. Do you understand? Graham looked around the table, searching for allies, for someone who might object. The board members who'd worked with him for 15 years now looked at him like something toxic, something that needed to be removed before it contaminated everything else. This is insane. You're destroying my career based on one poorly worded email. Ezra's voice cut through, quiet but absolute. 4 careers. You destroyed 4 careers to cover your incompetence. I'm only here because you were so confident in your power that you didn't bother to check who you were framing. You saw the uniform and assumed I was nobody. That invisible meant powerless. You were wrong. The words hung in the air, final and inarguable. Graham stood on legs that looked unsteady and walked toward the door. Security was already awaiting two men in dark suits who'd been summoned during Ezra's presentation, standing ready for exactly this outcome. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Victoria returned to her seat and looked at Ezra, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Calloway, the board owes you an apology. You were wrongfully terminated. Your record will be corrected, you'll receive full back pay from the termination date, and we're prepared to discuss appropriate compensation for what you endured. What about Isaac Webb, Dominic Cross, and Marcus Thorne? Victoria glanced at Robert Kim, who nodded. Their cases will be reviewed immediately. If evidence supports it, and it clearly does, their terminations will be reversed. They'll be offered reinstatement with back pay or financial settlement, their choice. Their records will be corrected. And policy changes. To make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The chairman leaned forward, pulling a legal pad toward him. What would you recommend, Mr. Calloway Independent Review Board, for all terminations? 3 members minimum, at least 1 from outside the employee's chain of command. Mandatory review of any employee's prior bug reports or safety complaints before termination for performance issues. And statistical monitoring of demographic patterns and disciplinary actions. If any manager's numbers deviate significantly from department norms, automatic audit triggers. The chairman made notes, several other board members doing the same. We'll implement those policies. Anything else, a whistleblower protection program. Anonymous reporting channel with guaranteed investigation. No retaliation against employees who raise concerns in good faith, even if those concerns turn out to be mistaken. Victoria's expression showed something that might have been approval. We'll call it the Calloway standard. The consequences unfolded over the following weeks with mechanical inevitability. Graham Rutherford was arrested on charges of fraud and falsifying official records, bail set at $50,000. The Boston Globe ran a business section feature detailing the terminations, the investigation, the systematic pattern. Diane Pembroke was terminated for suppressing Isaac Webb's ethics complaint, though she avoided criminal charges by cooperating fully with investigators. The eviction notice disappeared, replaced by lease renewal and 3 months of back rent paid from Fortress's settlement. The robotics camp permission slip was signed, check cleared. Zeph stopped asking why Connor's dad had been wrong. She knew now had learned lessons about power and justice that no 7-year-old should need, but that some children learned anyway. Isaac Webb called on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the board meeting. They offered me my position back. Senior Network Administrator. 40% salary increase, full benefits, written apology in my personnel file. Are you taking it? I start Monday. Dominic got the same offer, he's thinking about it. Marcus decided to stay in Atlanta, but he took the settlement. $50,000 in a clean reference he can actually use. Ezra heard satisfaction in Isaac's voice. Vindication from watching an unjust system finally acknowledge its failures. You did this, Ezra. You made them look at what they'd been ignoring. We did this. You had the logs. Dominic had documentation. Marcus had his story. I just assembled the evidence and refused to stay invisible. No. You stood in that room and made them see us. That's what changed everything. Fortress Dynamics offered Ezra the position of Chief Security Officer, reporting directly to Victoria Ashford. Salary $175,000 plus equity. His office was on the 14th floor, 3 doors from where he used to empty trash bins. The first day he stood at the window watching planes descend toward Logan. His nameplate read Ezra Calloway, CSO, in letters that still felt surreal. The leather chair probably cost more than a month's rent used to. On the credenza sat 2 photographs, Naomi at their wedding, Zeph at the robotics fair holding a first-place ribbon. Victoria appeared in his doorway. Settling in still feels like someone else's life. She entered and closed the door, posture less formal than in the boardroom. I wanted to thank you for trusting me with the truth, for giving me the chance to do this right. I didn't have much choice. You were the only person who believed me. Victoria moved to the window, standing beside him. My brother Andrew needed someone to believe him. He reported safety violations at a warehouse in Somerville. Management fired him for being a troublemaker. 6 months later, unable to find work, he drove into a concrete barrier at 90 miles per hour. Ezra absorbed this understanding now, the fury he'd seen in that boardroom. I'm sorry, so am I, but I can't bring Andrew back. All I can do is make sure the next person has someone who actually listens, who actually acts. She turned from the window. The board approved the Calloway standard yesterday. Independent review, whistleblower, protection, demographic monitoring. Being implemented company-wide next quarter. That's good. 5 other tech companies contacted me asking for implementation details. You've changed more than just Fortress. A pause stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Victoria's professionalism hadn't changed, but something else had shifted: recognition of shared experience, shared understanding of what it meant to fight systems and sometimes win. Dinner sometime? Her voice was careful, testing boundaries. Not business, just dinner. Ezra met her eyes, seeing vulnerability there behind the CEO authority. I'd like that. The dinner started in February. Victoria chose a small Italian place in the North End, quiet enough for conversation. They talked about Andrew, about Naomi, about grief that changed shape over time without ever leaving. By May, Victoria was joining them for weekend outings, the aquarium, the science museum. One Saturday morning, she stayed for breakfast, and Zeph asked if she could help with a robotics project. Can you solder? Because Dad's really bad at it. Victoria laughed, genuine and unguarded. I can solder. Show me what you're building. Watching them at the kitchen table, Zeph explaining her sensor array with enthusiasm, Victoria asking technical questions that made Zeph beam. Ezra felt something shift. Not replacement, nothing could replace Naomi, but something new, something that looked like a future. By October, when Zeph asked if Victoria was staying, Ezra and Victoria looked at each other and realized they'd been moving toward that answer for months. Not new mom, just Victoria. But yes, she's staying. 1 year after the board meeting, the Ashford Callaway STEM Fund announced its first scholarship cohort. 15 students, children of employees wrongfully terminated from various companies, each receiving full tuition for 4-year engineering degrees. The press conference was held at MIT. Zeph sat front row, 8 years old now, wearing a dress she'd picked herself. Victoria sat beside her, not as CEO, but as family. After the press conference, they drove to Castle Island, walked along the seawall while afternoon sun turned the harbor gold. Zeph ran ahead, chasing seagulls, fearless and confident. Victoria's hand found Ezra's. She's amazing, she is. Gets that from her mother and her father. Ezra watched Zeph scramble onto a boulder, arms spread wide. You know what she asked me this morning? If Andrew would be proud of what we did. What did you tell her? That he would have loved meeting her? That he would have wanted to see this, the scholarships, the policy changes, the 4 men getting their careers back? Victoria's grip tightened. I told her yes, he would have been proud. Zeph jumped off the boulder and ran back breathless. Dad, Ms. Victoria, come see the plane. She grabbed both their hands and pulled them toward the water's edge where a 747 was making final approach. They stood together, watching it descend, landing gear, deploying, touching down with a puff of smoke. Is that as big as the towers? Dad, Ezra thought about the question, about the metaphor Naomi had used for things that mattered beyond immediate lives. Bigger, Zeph. What we did is bigger than any building. We changed the rules so other kids' dads won't get fired for being right. We made telling the truth safer than staying quiet. Zeph considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Mom would have liked that. Ezra knelt to her level. Your mom would be so proud of you, baby, for standing up to Connor, for reminding me why I couldn't give up, for being brave when everything was scary. They walked back toward the car as sunset painted the sky orange and purple. Behind them, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm. The planes kept descending. The city glowed as darkness gathered. That night, after Zeph was asleep, Ezra stood at his window looking out at Boston's skyline. Somewhere out there, someone was probably being wrongfully accused. Someone was probably wondering if speaking up was worth the cost. He couldn't save them all. The Callaway Standard would help some, but systems were stubborn and injustice found new forms. But he'd proven change was possible. That documentation mattered. That one person refusing to stay invisible could cascade into something larger. His phone buzzed. Text from Isaac Webb. Just heard from the 15th scholarship recipient. Kid's dad was fired from a warehouse for reporting safety violations. Kid wants to study civil engineering. Says he's going to design safer buildings. Thought you'd want to know. Ezra typed back, higher than the towers. He looked at Naomi's photograph, at her smile frozen in time. Wherever she was, he hoped she could see what their daughter was becoming, what he'd helped build from wreckage. Tomorrow the work would continue. The monitoring, the advocacy, the slow transformation of culture from something protecting power to something protecting people. But tonight the work was done. Tonight Ezra Callaway stood in his apartment and felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Certainty that tomorrow would be better than today, that the arc of his life had finally bent back toward justice. Higher than the towers. Always higher than the towers.